had what we call, in my world, a D-Day or a discovery day. I discovered that my now ex-husband was a sex addict and he had a secret life. And I discovered this when he got arrested. The hole opened up in the floor and I sort of fell into it. I could feel myself falling over and over again. And at that same moment, I saw 1,000 doors open in front of me. Like everything about life was going to have to change.
Hey there, welcome to another episode of Carve Your Own Fucking Path, a podcast made to inspire you to create a life and business on your own terms. You'll hear candid interviews with people who have boldly decided to blaze their own trail, and the occasional solo show with me, your host. I'm Willa McDonough, on-camera coach, storyteller, and remote video producer. 5 years ago, I moved from my home base of San Francisco to the coast of Portugal, taking a big leap into the unknown. Some called it courageous. I called it carving my own fucking path. Today, I live in Lisbon and run a business that elevates your online presence, helping you show up confidently on camera to create videos that showcase your brand and personality so you can get more visibility and attract clients by being yourself. If you're just starting out in business or you've been doing it for a while, you're sure to pick up tidbits of actionable advice and hopefully feel inspired by stories from people who have chosen the unconventional and sometimes messy path. And if you've been waiting for a sign to start carving your own fucking path, this is it. I'm so happy you're here. Welcome, Jenni Rochelle, to the podcast, To Carve Your Own Fucking Path. I am very excited to have you. You are a leader in the space of coaching and mentoring women specifically to not give up on love, to keep the faith, keep going, and heal from betrayal trauma, which diving into all of your content, I've learned so much. And I have to say this, it's incredibly relatable. So many people have been through this in some way, and you have dedicated your life's work to this. So just want to acknowledge you for that right off the bat.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's like many people who find their true callings. We go through it through an uncomfortable doorway, right? It's not this thing, I'm going to specialize in betrayal trauma when I grow up, right?
Yes.
But
exactly.
But if we're open to the path, right, it reveals itself to us often. Excuse me.
Yes, exactly. And your story is just that, going through something, and we'll dive into that, but you experiencing something so devastating that it completely changed the course of your life.
Absolutely.
So could you bring us, I always like to dive into the backstory. Could you bring us to a moment or a time that you can remember when you decided, I'm going to carve my own fucking path?
I think so many moments, really, so many moments. I think since I was a little girl, right, there was this I'm meant for something, I'm meant for something, I'm meant for something. And I spent, 40 years sort of trying to figure out what that was. And had decided 2014, 2015 that I wanted to be a coach. And so I was sort of doing that thing when new coaches do. What am I going to specialize in? What's my niche? Everybody says I had to have a niche. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And then in the middle of that, I discovered I had what we call in my world a D-Day or a discovery day, which is when I discovered that my now ex-husband was a sex addict and he had a secret life. And I discovered this when he got arrested. He got arrested, and in that moment, I knew that everything in my life was about to change. And it was sort of this very sort of Lifetime movie moment where I'm on the phone with the person at the jail downtown, and they tell me that not only did he get arrested, that he had actually gotten arrested for the same thing 3 months prior. Now, it turned out that wasn't true. He didn't actually get arrested, but his license plate was in the system for the same thing. So, but in that moment, it was the hole opened up in the floor and I sort of fell into it. I could feel myself falling over and over again. And at that same moment, I saw 1,000 doors open in front of me. Everything about life was going to have to change. And it still took about 2.5 years for that to change. This is pretty typical when a person discovers, and, I am trained to deal specifically with partners of sex addicts. That's my story. You could have betrayal trauma and that not be your story. That's a much bigger, much more inclusive experience. But like many people, when we discover this trauma, our brains can't deal with it. I couldn't yet grasp the severity of what was happening in my life. Plus, I was like, we got arrested. He's going to get his shit together. But he didn't. He didn't. It took about 2.5 years later where I had another D-Day and realized, all right, I'm going to have to get serious. He's not going to get better on his own. I'm going to have to take care of myself and figure out what to do to keep myself and take care of my kids. And went through this whole process of trying to find help for me, which is one of the reasons why I eventually went into this work, because back then there was so little known about partners of sex addicts, people who are in relationships. There had been some work developed for a couple of decades around how to treat the sex addicts, but the partners in relationship with them for so long were labeled as co-addicts, right? That we were codependent, we were enabling, right? All that sort of really judgy, pathologizing that's mainly placed on women, right?
That's true.
Sort of diagnoses, that we get. And then, but there was a lot of work right around that time. So this is 2015, 2016. Some work really starting to be done by some leaders in the field that I'm in, and to realize that the symptoms that were being labeled as enabling and codependence and co-addict were actually PTSD. If you overlaid what it looked like, the hypervigilance, looking at all the phone texts, the trying to control the situation, they figured out that the partner, often if you were in the couples therapy, they look like the craziest person in the room. And they've done research, right? That now they know that partners of sex addicts report symptoms of PTSD similar to someone who's had a violent sexual assault.
Wow.
Because it is profound. It is, imagine this whole life you've created with someone is not true. My ex had a secret life that I never knew about, right? That I didn't know. And that's what I hear over and over again. Women who've been married for 2 decades, 3 decades, and discover, on Christmas of 2012, he was doing X, right? Or on the vacation. For me, vacations, there's a lot of shit around vacations where all this stuff was going that I didn't know. So through this process of somebody help me, I feel crazy. And then I finally found a coach who went on to become my mentor and one of my good friends. Her name is Sarah Morales. And it was through working with her that I realized, this is what I'm supposed to do. Okay, this is how I can take what happened to me, right? And use it, redeem it into, I want to help other women avoid what I'm going through. So that's how I landed in this space, which continues to evolve, right? Every day, every month, every year.
Okay. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
I can't believe that was not that long ago.
No, it wasn't. It really wasn't. Yeah.
And that there wasn't that many resources.
Which is what's really shocking, right? It's come a long way. Even so, he was arrested in 2012. So I'm coming up on my 10-year with trauma-versaries, right?
That's a great way to turn it around.
Right. Yeah. Coming up on that. And so, it's not that long ago.
And you've said that, it's not about saving him. Right. It's about saving yourself.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
So you tried that on the get him in treatment. And it's like putting him first, or this other person, first.
Right. Absolutely. And that's part of what I think can get labeled as this enabling or codependent or trying to fix a relationship. And there's 2 things about that we now look at differently. One, we're actually trying to create safety for ourselves. We are wired to create safety for ourselves. And like when we go through a trauma, we heal in phases from trauma. First phase is safety and stability. Before we have the tools, before we have ways to care for ourselves, it looks a whole lot like, I'm going to fix him. It looks like enabling. It looks like I need him to be okay for me to be okay. What we know is like, that's trying to create safety for ourselves, this really fundamental need that we have. We feel so powerless, right? Like, if I can just fix this, it's also a kind of bargaining, like in the grief process. If I can just fix him, everything's going to be okay.
And you deeply care about this person.
And you deeply love this person. Exactly. You don't stop loving them just because they become the worst thing that ever happened to you.
Right.
It's still there. Yeah.
And so in that moment, did you have, like, what kind of trauma response did you have? Can you remember?
Oh, there were so many. The first time that it happened, so that was November 2012, I remember up all night. I'm also a recovering alcoholic. So drinking got a whole lot worse for about 6 months. That was one of the ways it showed up for me. Hypervigilance is a thing that has continued. And so here's the thing. Trauma is the gift that keeps on giving. I've done a ton of healing. I've done all of it, right? All the kooky stuff I've done from EMDR to like having shamans do an egg reading, right? In Mexico, I've done all of it. And it gets better and better. But one of the ways for me it shows up is hypervigilance, which means any sort of weird, unusual thing that shows up in my life means something bad's going to happen. Like the most innocuous thing. This is my favorite story. This was several years ago. I was still married to my ex. And we got this package in the mail. It was a child's like magnifying glass, like to look at bugs outside. It was plastic and it was scratched, which was weird to me. And I was like, why would somebody send us this used magnifying glass? And then I decided it was because somebody was sending me a secret message. And this is the thing. I know I sound crazy and paranoid, but this is what it looks like, right? Someone was sending me a secret message that I need to look closer at my life. I looked at the tracking label. I tried to figure out who this person was, who they were that had sent this to me. What happened was, this was back when Amazon first started selling used things. And, my stepmother-in-law had mailed it to our son to look at bugs. It was the most innocuous, most innocent thing. But my nervous system was like, oh my God, this terrible thing is something bad's going to happen. Right. So that was one of the biggest ways, depending on where I was in the process, couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, heart pounding and racing, lost a ton of weight. Right. Just incredible anxiety. And I think anxiety is the wrong word. It's PTSD. Like I think a lot of things we label as anxiety are actually PTSD, right? That's happening. Completely dysregulated nervous system. It was all I thought about. And one of the things that happens is like, when you're still in the relationship, you want to talk about it constantly. You want to talk about it with them constantly, like, because your brain's trying to find meaning in what happened. It's trying to fill in the dots, right?
I was going to say that. Must have been so many questions. And how do you sleep next to that person after being betrayed? And what does that say? This is a very hard question to answer, but what does that say about intuition? Especially as a woman, don't we know everything? Mother's intuition?
We do. It's a funny thing. I think that we do. I think that it's funny. The day he got arrested, I was pushing like my little kid, my little baby in the stroller to the supermarket, and he was home late and from work. And I thought to myself, maybe he's dead in a ditch, right? Like maybe something's wrong. And immediately this voice came in that was like, oh, you're being silly. It's fine. But the problem is, because we're raised with pre-existing trauma, so that voice, I had really been taught or had learned to ignore that voice because I didn't trust it, because it did see dangerous things when it wasn't really there.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's also part of like, we're really taught to ignore our intuition. We're taught to ignore our bodies. We're taught to like live in this rational mind. And what we actually know now is our bodies know way more than our mind knows.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
But we're taught to ignore a lot of that.
Yes. The mind can compartmentalize, right? And the body takes it and stores it, and then it creates and manifests, different problems and symptoms. So that's the fascinating thing about the mind and our subconscious, and how we're operating from that place all the time, but we have no idea about that. So you talked about previous trauma when you were a child, something like that. Okay.
Yes. So I have a childhood history of sexual abuse by a family member. And at this point in my life, and this was like, early 40s. So here's one of the symptoms of PTSD. The dates and everything are really, I have to think really hard about when things happen, because our mind like erases like what the bad things that happened. Yeah. So I have to think really clearly about what happened in what year. But at that point in my life, I had not really dealt with the fact that this abuse had happened to me, and I didn't understand the long-term effects. And now I know more about it, like, and all the sort of things that happened to me in my life, including the relationships, including ending up in the relationship with this person, with my ex, were like the accumulation of this unprocessed, unhealed trauma. And I want to be very clear. I don't like codependence. I don't like any of those words. I've said that many times. However, I do think that over a lifetime, when we have trauma, especially from our early age, we spend sort of the rest of our lives trying to work that out, even when we're not aware of it, even when would never label as what happened. And that working it out looks like that's what gets labeled, I think, is codependence, right? And that enabling behavior.
Interesting. Yes. And you did bring up recovering alcoholic.
Exactly. Yes. Also, high correlation with childhood sexual abuse, childhood trauma. Exactly. Like it's sort of like an algorithm, right? You put in this, you put in this. This is what it looks like when you get older if you don't get help for it.
And so all of this came to a head in 2012.
Yes. Well, 2012 was when he got arrested. And then one of my PTSD responses was I shoved it deep, deep, deep down inside. And I drank really heavily for about 6 more months, and then realized, and actually in the moment when he got arrested, I thought to myself, he's a sex addict. We've got to get him help. But it sort of stopped there. And my drinking got much, much worse for like 6 months. But even in that moment, I was like, I'm going to have to quit drinking. I knew it was going to happen, but it took like 6 months for it to really to happen. Then once I got sober and started coming out of denial, became more and more able to deal with it. And I started to say this earlier. I've seen this happen so many times with women that I work with. There'll be sort of this initial thing that happens. And then it can take years, sometimes decades, before we get to the point where we're able to see what's going on. Because as powerful as our intuition is, that need, that, like I always talk about the hippocampus, right? We're like, it erases the things we don't, it doesn't want us to remember. It's right, it's wiping it all out. Denial is a powerful safety mechanism. It's trying to keep us safe.
Yes, exactly. And it served us at some point.
Absolutely. It serves us until it doesn't. Yes. Yeah.
So that was something, it sounds like many layers of denial. I mean, even again, the drinking, I mean, that's no small feat to move forward and past that, especially in a time of crisis.
Right. Yeah.
And having small children.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Well, you're giving so much inspiration. You're happily married.
I am happily married.
living your best life.
Yes, it's true.
and in a very, I mean, a really a short amount of time. I know it probably did not feel like that, but in general. So, well, I did take your quiz.
Ooh, awesome.
Which was very interesting. Because I think most people, and I can say most women, you know, that's who you specifically work with, can identify with these various stages, even if it wasn't a massive betrayal, you know, of cheating or something. So your quiz is called, "Do you have betrayal trauma from a romantic relationship?"
Yes.
And it was not easy to take because some questions hit on, you know, certain experiences. And that's something I don't have a crazy dramatic story, but I do have a story around, you know, betrayal. And I find it, even though it was years ago, that the symptoms are still there.
Sure.
So I guess it's an ongoing process.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
So can you describe your 3 phases?
Yes. I'll define betrayal trauma, and then I'll describe the phases, and then I'll have to credit like the people who actually came up with this, and I've just sort of adapted it and given it different names for what I see in clients. So betrayal trauma was a term developed, I believe her name is Jennifer Freed, and she was working with children who'd been abused by their parents, by their caregivers. So betrayal trauma, and its first definition, its most basic definition, is when a person or institution that we rely on for safety or security betrays our trust. So if you think about that, that's a really broad term. So we all have experienced some kind of betrayal trauma, not just in romantic. That's the thing that we think about first, right? Is like, oh, my partner, romantic betrayal trauma. But if you think about, like, you know, the priest scandal in the Catholic Church, that was a betrayal by an institution at a huge level. Whether or not, like, you were a person who was abused, the church lying and covering that up, you know, that was a huge trauma that, like, thousands, millions of people experienced. One of my favorite other examples is, I live in Texas. February of 2021, we had no power or water for a week. That was a huge trauma that that our state experienced. People died, and we felt betrayed by the people who were supposed to keep the power and the water on. Like, that's just supposed to happen. It can also happen with girlfriends. I hear that a lot, where we have a good friend who betrayed our trust. Work, bosses, colleagues, family members. And of course, romantic relationships. Those are all ways we experience betrayal trauma. And the beauty is, and it's like you said in the beginning, it's this term that most of us don't even know. And it's one of these ways we're like, well, just move on, right? Just move on and get over it. It's in the past. Why are you talking about the past? Because it was a trauma. And luckily, we know now, like, we used to think, we talked about capital T trauma, like big, huge car crashes, assaults, deaths. But what we know now is that actually I believe we all have little t traumas that over a lifetime are as significant as, like, big ones. They accumulate. So that's betrayal trauma. We heal through trauma in phases, and the phases of recovery are developed by a woman named Judith Herman, who wrote a book called Trauma and Recovery. She was just talking about trauma in general. And her book talks about we heal in 3 phases. The first one, as I mentioned earlier, safety and stability. We have to have safety in our lives before we can do any sort of healing work. So if we're still in the abusive relationship, the toxic relationship, the unsafe workplace, we're never going to be able to heal because we're constantly being re-traumatized. Safety and stability. The second phase, once we have some safety and stability, then we go into, it's called remembrance and mourning. So we start to remember our story. We're able to look backwards. We're able to actually feel the grief for what happened. And we can start to make sense of it. And this could be a powerful place where we can start to shift the narrative of what happened to us. And we can start to move from being victim to, like, I'm a survivor. And that's a really key turning point in the healing process. And then the last phase is reconnection. So reconnection with ourselves, reconnection with other people. And so that's where I sort of come in. That's my sweet spot and the women that I like to work with. But so safety and stability, the avatar, we use that word that I use for women, is awakening warrior, right? This is like you've discovered this thing is happening. You've been like most enlightenment experiences. We don't really want it to happen, but here it is, right? So you're awakened to the truth and you have to find your inner warrior to create and fight for the safety and stability that you need. So that's like one of the results, like from the betrayal trauma quiz. The second one is rising beauty. Rising beauty. Yes. Rising beauty. So this is where you're starting to come out of like the really dark times. You're able to start to focus on yourself a little bit, to start to do some of that inner reclaiming work. And there'll be this moment that we talked about earlier, this shift, not just in the story, but in the fact of like, I can't save him. And whatever is going on with him, if he's getting better or not, I really have to focus on me. And in that moment, we start to be able to do some of the looking back and inner child and like family of origin work. And I'll give you a cautionary tale. If you're an awakening warrior and if you're in a person who has betrayed you and you're in a couples therapy and it's new and it's raw and they want you to talk about your family, you try to run away. Like that is not the time to do that work, right? You need safety and stability first. So when we move to the rising beauty, we start to focus on ourselves more. We do some of that inner healing work. And then from there, you move into comeback queen, which is when you start to move on. Exactly. You start to move on, you start to date, you start to just sort of venture out into the world again, because the thing about trauma is it's so isolating, especially with betrayal, with sex addiction. We don't want to talk about it. There's so much shame that we carry about what happened. There's such a stigma about it. And so it's really like reemerging into the world again. And it can be dating. It can be like connecting with other family members. And there are a lot of clients that I work with that don't have any friends. So I'm like, how do we get you a community? How do you get... And the sad part is the last couple of years, because of COVID, that was really hard to do, right? But now we're coming back out. So they're able to make friends. And this is also one of the things I really focus on is, and the name Comeback Queen comes from one of my programs called Your Big Sexy Comeback, which is like
love that.
reclaiming your sexuality, right? Because when this betrayal happens, when the sex addiction is there, especially, but not just that, it really impacts how we feel about ourselves. What's wrong with me? Why didn't he pick me? I don't look like the women I talked about pornography. Pornography is a huge, many women consider it a betrayal. I have a huge problem with pornography in the industry that it is. Some people have different opinions, but there are many women who feel that pornography is a betrayal. And if that's how you feel, that's how you feel, and you get to feel that way. But I don't look like the women in those videos, right? I don't, that sort of wrestling with their sexuality, and we start to get really, really shut down. And what I've known, what I've realized too over time is that it's not, well, first of all, we all have betrayal trauma, but as women in particular, we have a wound around our sexuality, right? Like we are not taught to be sexual beings, or it's like this, right? It's
a lot of shame.
A lot of shame.
Yeah. And it's worse now. Worse now, I think, for younger women. And I must have seen it in some film, a documentary about the digital age and how women are pushed into sending pictures really young, but they're pushed into sending. And if they do, they're considered a slut. If they don't, then they're considered a prude. And so there is no space to go actually anymore. So I can't even imagine how hard it is now for young girls. Yeah,
it's true. It's everywhere. Like the images are everywhere. And, the thing pressure. About the pressure to do that, and the thing about pornography, which is ubiquitous, like the average exposure age to pornography is like 10 years old. 15 because the internet, it's so easy to get it. It's everywhere. And the women are often literally altered to look differently, right? Their genitals have been altered, their breasts have been altered. Everything is fake, And so these young boys and young women, they see this image, not to mention, like, that's not what sex looks like, right? It's not what it looks, it's not the actual experience. So everybody comes in with this, the young boys, and this, there's more and more evidence of young boys who have trouble getting aroused with the real girl or person because we have it's called an arousal template, like what we're exposed to that turns us on shapes then what turns us on.
Okay.
So these young.
Yeah. So really young, that starts.
Really young, that can start.
Makes sense. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. There's like lots of studies now that are showing that young boys having to take Viagra because they can't get an erection in real life. And on the flip side, you have all these young girls, right, who I don't look like that. I don't act like that. I don't have an orgasm like just some tiny thing happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have boys, right?
I do. I have 3 boys.
Oh,
and a
3.
Stepson. I have 4, including my stepson. I have 4 boys. Yes.
Oh my God. I'm sorry.
It is honestly, although truthfully, it's my greatest form of activism. It really is raising good.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
And what's the oldest?
He'll be 20 this month.
Oh, okay. So you've been in it for a long time.
We've been in it for 2 decades.
Yes. Having these conversations, I'm sure.
Having lots of awkward conversations, lots of like, I'm uncomfortable, you're uncomfortable, and we're going to talk about it anyway.
Yes. Yeah. You have to.
You have to. Yeah.
Yeah. They're very fortunate.
Well, they may or may not agree with you based on the day, but that's the lot. It's not personal, it's parenting, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Having those hard conversations. I think I have friends, their kids are now teenagers and it's getting real.
Yeah. Yeah.
My friend says they're bigger and the problems are much bigger.
Absolutely. It's like when they're really little, you're just trying to keep them from killing themselves and because they can't walk, physically danger. And then by the time they hit 16, then they're in cars, right? And then you're also then trying to make sure they don't hurt themselves. Right. But then the problems just get bigger and bigger as they move out into the world, right? And you're never really prepared for any of it. It's a crapshoot every day.
Is it? Okay. I have no children. Yeah.
Oh, parent. Yeah. It's every day. Maybe it'll work. Yeah. Maybe it won't. Often I'll tell my kids now, just send me an invoice. When you're in therapy, just send it to me. I'll pay for it. Right.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. It is. It's all hard. And I think, doing the work again that you do and being there, not as a therapist, but really as a mentor and a coach is huge, is really huge. Yeah. And having been there as well. And what were we going to say?
I was just saying, yes. And so I sort of got off the topic, but part of that reconnection phase and the healing process absolutely relates to parenting. Parenting with PTSD is a challenge when you have a young boy or a young girl who is lying to you, which is developmentally appropriate for teenagers or children at different ages. They learn to lie. That's what teenagers do. But in the moment, you're like, oh my God, is he just like my ex? Right. And you have these huge triggers and you have to be really, really self-aware and say, and this is the same thing true. Like in my marriage now, I still get triggered from shit from my past. And so when I'm triggered by something my husband does or my kid does, you have to be able to say, yes, I'm having a huge reaction right now. 10% of it has to do with what's going on and validate there's something going on that is upsetting. But 90% of it, or whatever, some percentage of it, the reason why it's so big is because this thing happened to me in the past.
Yeah.
being able to know that so that you can then have these moments. And that's how we start to heal, right? Is to have these moments and to work through them with the people that we love, where they can be consistent and trustworthy. And we trust ourselves to say, no, my intuition is telling me that something's going on in this moment. And here's the thing too about intuition. And it really is all of the work that I do. We're working on intuition the whole time. We're working on listening to our bodies the whole time. And here's the thing. We learn to trust our intuition until it's proven wrong. It's a very hard stance to take, but right.
Yes.
Yes.
So trusting it until there's evidence. Okay. Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
And this comes up quite a bit with people. I find a lot of people that are in your space, in the coaching and even business space really operate from intuition. And at times it's really can be challenging to tap into intuition. What are some things that you would say to help strengthen your intuition, or what are some signs potentially that people could look for?
So there's two things. The quickest answer that I'll always tell people is your intuition is never mean. Right. So the cycle, is it inner critic? Is it fear? Is it PTSD?
Yeah.
Right. We have to learn to separate between those. But then to really tap into it, we have to be in a calm, regulated nervous system. So it really begins. Yeah.
Come on.
That. Ew.
That makes sense now.
Yeah. It's like,
Yeah. You can't be trying to find answers or tune if it's completely off. It's so glaring.
Yeah. If we're grounded, and so that's number one. When we get triggered, when we're trying to figure something out, we get quiet, we get still, we slow everything down. One of the things that I teach all my ladies are going slow is your superpower. So if you're in a situation and you're like, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do, just slow down. It is a false narrative 99% of the time that we have to do something quickly. And that's where we cannot listen. Obviously, sometimes your intuition is that quick, but it's learning to tap into, learning to know, when is this my intuition? When is it like, so I'm doing this midline of the body, like we're centered, we're in alignment with ourselves, that we know it feels good, it feels solid. And going slow, breathing, literally moving slow, like, literally like, I'm going to take a glass really really slowly, or like when I'm setting up for the podcast, I'll start to get excited or anxious or nervous, and I'm trying to get the cords plugged in. And the more I try to go faster, right, the worse it gets.
Yeah, totally.
But if take a breath, slow down, be very intentional, very present with like, I'm going to untangle the cord, and like all of that sends signals to our nervous system and to our body that we're safe. So there's so many ways, so many tools to practice regulating our nervous system. Meditation, journaling, all that shit some people have been telling you to do for 2 decades.
It works.
It works. It actually works.
Old crystals.
All of it. Totally.
Yes, it works.
I love that so much. Yeah, it works. It works.
Yeah. This is very helpful because being very cerebral, it can really get us in trouble.
Absolutely.
I think, because it's a swirl. It's a talking in and out of things. I really like what you said about the intuition never being mean and always having, of course, our best interest. Yes. So that inner critic. And then you said the PTSD, what does that look like as far as an inner voice?
So that could be, so when I talked about the hypervigilance before, it's like that. It's just, it could be very, very, and it could be very, very old brain, reptilian brain. Something bad's going to happen, right? Something bad's going to happen. Okay. You're going to fail. You're going to suck at this. He's going to cheat that. So that mean, like there's a different quality. There's a meanness to it, as opposed to you're walking down the street and it's dark and scary and your body's like, get out. That's different. right? Can you see like the energy of that is different? There could be a difference between protection, right? And meanness. And it just takes practice. And you're right. We're taught to live. We're cerebral. I'm the same way. We're just programmed since like ancient philosophers. I think, therefore I am.
Right.
We've been set up for centuries to value this thing. And it's a lie. We know now, like our thoughts are not who we really are. Right. And so that's a huge thing too, is becoming aware of our thoughts. And our thoughts versus our intuition. So if you've done any work on this, you can become aware. And the first time I heard that, I was like, what do you mean I'm not my thoughts? That's crazy.
Yeah,
but when you separate it, it'd be like, oh, I'm having all these crazy thoughts. And the part of you that can look and see those crazy thoughts, that's your intuition. That's your centered self.
Okay. Interesting. I like how you described that. When you're the observer.
Yes. When you're the observer of like, oh, wow, I'm having a big reaction to this right now.
Okay. And what if you have, I understand if you're in a relationship with someone that is has a sex addict, for example, it's an extreme, they need help, but someone that is not necessarily, cheating or anything, but being dishonest about certain things to avoid conflict. And so there's that layer there and, and then you keep getting triggered or something like that. Is that the triggers? I guess it's a question about triggers as well. Is that partly intuition and saying like putting yourself, trying to keep safe, or is that an old wound? Again, this is hard to answer potentially, but.
Yeah, it is really hard to answer. And I will say that when we're triggered, it is very hard to sort of separate between, is there something really going on in the moment that's my intuition or not? And here's the thing: when you're triggered, I don't think you can hear your intuition. Yeah, you can't.
Makes sense.
Yeah. All you hear is like the trauma. You hear the PTSD. You hear the like, oh my God, the same thing is happening all over again, right? But if there is dishonesty going on, I'm also obviously safety and honesty are my huge core values. And I don't even really want to say this. We all lie a little bit, right? We all don't tell the whole truth. We avoid conflict. But everybody has to decide. I had a girlfriend tell me this one time. She goes, in every relationship, you have to decide how much dishonesty you're willing to live with. Because there's always going to be a little bit, right? Just because of human nature. But we get to decide that. And so even if you have a person who is, and the worst things are like these lies of omission. I didn't lie. Like, well, not telling me the whole truth is actually still being dishonest about it. Right. So you have to decide, is this something on with this person that they cannot be honest? And part of like the conflict avoidance is they have to trust you. And it can go both ways if you're the one doing it. We have to trust our people to handle the truth and not abandon us. So many of us, and this is the thing that I see, I've seen with Jeff, my husband, we've both had to learn. We grew up, if people had fights, somebody left, right? Through multiple marriages, through abandonment, like all of that stuff. If there's a conflict, somebody left. So working through that trigger, which is its own trigger, working through that and learning to trust, I can be myself with this person and they're still going to love me. That's real intimacy. That is intimacy. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, definitely. And I love that you brought up intimacy.
Yes.
Because you are an expert in intimacy.
Every day it's a different, it's funny, I'm an expert. I do my best every day in my own life, right? And to share what the tools that I have learned, through this healing process, through like being in this relationship with this wonderful, beautiful man and trusting him and him trusting me and like the real intimate moments. So like what I talked about earlier, like when he's done something And I'm upset about it. And he's done something legitimately that I'm upset about. I have a right to be upset about it, but maybe only like 10% is really this, and 90% is what's happened in my previous life. And so like these moments where we're standing in the kitchen and being able to say, I can say to him, like, I'm really upset by what you did. And I can own that this reaction in my body, most of it is not about you. And he could like be there and say, I hear you. And it feels really awful to me that you're this mad at me right now. Like it's hurtful to him. And us both being able to say that and then saying, why don't we take 30 minutes or an hour or whatever, and then we will come back to the kitchen, later, and then do the repair work. Intimacy is about trusting someone to love you when you show them the parts of yourself that we don't really even like to look at on our own. And there's a huge amount of our own work that has to go into that process. I had, years of like recognizing this is what's happening in my body. Only a small part of it is about Jeff, or a small part of it is about my sons, or a small part of it is about a girlfriend, when I get upset about, like, all the relationships are tricky. And intimacy is just showing up and like willing to do the hard work of showing our real selves, of being authentic, even when it's scary. And then when there is conflict, being very, very intentional about repair. Jeff and I have lots of little like rituals when we have conflict, because you have conflict as a couple. If you don't, that's worse, right?
Yes, I agree.
Totally. So how do you repair that? How do you come in and say, I'm still upset about what happened, and not in a gaslighty kind of way, right? Not in a self-gaslighting kind of way, but in a way of like, I am 51 years old now. This relationship is really important to me. I want to make it work. I'm going to be a grown up. So I'm going to come in. All right, how do we repair what's going on between us? And this is like a Gottman thing again. This is not anything Jenni came up with. The Gottmans are all about we make repairs. And so Jeff and I have like rituals that we'll do. I can't go to bed upset and angry. I can't go to bed if there's a rupture in our relationship. I'll wake up with a hangover, like an emotional hangover. So if we're in bed, we've gotten to the point where we can't resolve something, but we have to go to bed because it's late. And the later it is, the more tired you are, the more worse you're going to make everything. So just stop. And I'm really bad at that. I want to fix it.
I want to fight and fix it.
But just put him to understand what I'm saying, right?
Yeah.
Being able to say, we got to go to bed because only bad things are going to come out of our mouths now. So how do we fix it? And then we will do, a few things. One of them is we'll say 5 reasons why we love each other. We'll take turns, or we'll like recount some of our early dating memories, sort of like our origin story of why we fell in love with each other. So little things like that to like just repair this connection between us. It's huge. And we're like, oh yeah, I do love this person. Okay, that's right.
Definitely. You have to have that, the repair, because again, conflict is inevitable.
Right.
But it definitely is, in the repair pieces.
Absolutely.
So what if you now have left this relationship?
Yes.
You have left this sex addict, cheater, someone that has betrayed you. You want to move on. What are some of your comeback tips, let's say, for, and creating a new amazing relationship?
Yeah. So you start with, everything starts with, this is such a coachy thing to say, your core values, right? You start with doing the work of figuring out what's most important to you. And when you've been through a betrayal, most of the times I see safety is like safety, honesty is becoming these most important priorities. And whatever, they are for your core values, and then build everything through that. So when you start to think about like a person that you want to meet, or if you start dating again, you want to make sure that you're living in alignment with all of that. So when I wrote my Bumble profile, I met Jeff on Bumble.
Oh, nice. Oh, love that.
You can meet people on dating apps. That's how you meet people these days. That's how it works. I'm sorry.
It's true. Yep.
So many people are like, no, I just want to meet someone real life. I'm like, okay, you can try that. And when you're ready to write your profile, let me know. But everything in my dating profile was the most important things to me. So it talked about music. It talked about free spirit. It talked about foodie. It talked about roller coasters. My favorite band, Wilco, because all of those things seem really simple and silly, but they're actually the things that are most important to me, right? Which I've learned about myself. And so knowing that we want to find a person who has those shared values, right? And getting clear about those values, also getting clear, looking at our sexuality and how we feel about sex. Because so many of us, you know, we talked about this a little bit earlier. We have sort of these wounds around our sexuality. And there's like 5 lies, I believe, that we all have about sex, or we have one version of them. They're like, sex is secret, sex is hurtful, sex is a commodity, right? Sex has no moral bounds. And we all have some version of this that shows up. And getting really clear about the boundaries that we have around our sexuality and like what our values are. And like, that's different for everybody. For me, I was very promiscuous when I was younger. I was drinking. So of course, a lot of shady behavior, also symptoms of childhood sexual abuse, by the way. But so when I got out of this relationship and I was starting to move on, for me, I really wanted to keep my body. And this is just me. This is no judgment on anybody else. If you want to have orgasms and sex, if you're from an empowered alignment place, then do that. For me, I wanted to really be careful about who I shared my body and my energy with. And so I'd very sort of like, strict is not the right word, but very intentional. So like, when Jeff and I started dating, we didn't sleep together until we were like in love with each other. And I realized I didn't go into it thinking that's what I was going to do. But then I realized, no, I deserved that. That's what I wanted, was someone to be in love with me before I let them into that level of intimacy. And like going back to intimacy, there's so many different ways to experience it. Sex is just one of them. And actually, ideally, we experience different kinds of intimacy with this person before we have sex, because, you know, it's sort of like this thing we think is the most intimate. But if we haven't done the work, it's actually the least intimate, right? It can be the least.
True.
We have sex, we don't connect with the person. It's just this transactional experience.
Yes. And what are some examples of everyday intimacy? And how do you practice it?
So it's a lot of what, you know, I talked about before. It's about I haven't talked about it before, actually. Creating moments of conscious connection with our people, right? Every day, like finding activities that we can do. And this is like with Jeff. We'll go on walks. We just moved. We used to walk around our neighborhood, and now our whole life has changed. So our routines have changed. We used to live sort of in the suburbs, and now we live in downtown Austin. So our routines are like, we get up, take the dogs for walks on the outside. And it's like a way that we connect with each other. We talk about the day. We sit in the morning, we have coffee. What's your day look like? So it doesn't have to be these sort of big, elaborate romantic gestures. It's just like the tiny moments where you're completely present with your person and engaging in things that they really love. So things I used to do with my boys, I'll connect with them, right, in intimate ways. My youngest loves, this is a thing that we don't do anymore since we moved, but we would go for toad walks at night. Like
cute.
We'd walk around the neighborhood because he loves animals and reptiles. And so I would take him out and we would look for toads and like be completely present and doing this thing that he loved and experiencing the joy of that through them. I played hours of D&D. I did not enjoy that. But my teenagers loved that. I had a character. Her name was Nenya. I had all my powers. All of it. But that's what I mean. It's like, how do we love our people? How do we create these conscious moments of connection? Bathtubs. We don't have a bathtub anymore, but Jeff and I would get in the bathtub and like face each other, especially if we had a difficult thing we were talking through. I used to call them tough tuppy talks. We're in the bath, we're literally naked, right? Facing each other, but able to like, okay, we're going to sit here together. And you have to feel safety in the relationship to be able to do that, right? And having hard conversations, but it's not all hard. Intimacy also, like I said, it should be fun things, roller coasters, like trips, like just being. I heard this phrase recently, like that I really love, called ministry of presence, and it really is just being completely present with our person and feeling connected to them, because like these things.
Oof.
Right?
Addiction. Yeah.
Addiction and the death of intimacy, right? With the people in our real lives.
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. Thank you. Some good ones.
Thank you.
Simple things.
It's simple. Every day. That's the thing. It's every day. How do we do it every day?
And so from the past, again, this is for the person that's looking to be in a new relationship. How do they learn to choose differently? Because my understanding, it's a lot of subconscious stuff going on.
Absolutely. So that's why I talked about like we have the trauma very far in the past. We're continuing to work it out, right? We continue to work it out in a couple of different ways. One of them is we completely shut down and we disconnect ourselves from other people. We remain hypervigilant, like we never let people in. Another way that we work it out is we subconsciously try to reenact what happened. We put ourselves in situations where we try to. So trauma, think of trauma. This is one of the basic definitions. It's like something happens where we are overwhelmed in the moment and we can't do the thing that our nervous system would want us to do. So fight or flight. Like, so that energy, that experience gets trapped in our bodies. And then we spend the rest of our lives trying to like have that experience, have the relationship where we fight, literally, or flee, where we have the healing moment that we need. But if you do that, if something happens to you when you're 7, and then this is me, and then you're in your 40s and you're doing the same thing, it doesn't make sense anymore. And that behavior gets labeled as a personality defect. That's what gets, and I have to stop here because a lot of this language, this is stuff that I've thought about, but when I read it, Resmaa Menakem, who wrote My Grandmother's Hands, incredible author. Everybody should read the book. He talks about he talks about racism being the result of white bodies having trauma and in our bodies that we don't deal with, and it shows up as racism. Fascinating. But he talks about, incredible. So he talks about like over a lifetime, that behavior looks like a personality defect. And that then I take to say that's what gets labeled as like the codependence and the enabling. And we have work to do to heal that part of ourselves that is unconsciously trying to work this thing out. So one of the things that I do with clients is I do a process I call relational pattern. And it's a little bit of imago theory, which says we pick a person who reminds us of our parents so that we can work shit out, right? That thing we didn't get from our parents as little girls. We keep trying to pick a parent who's going to give it to us. And most of the time, they can't actually give it to us. So that's where we get stuck in these patterns. And then also I've taken a tool from the 12 steps, which is like this sort of relationship inventory. I have clients look at like all of the relationships, starting with parents, siblings, girlfriends, romantic relationships. And when you look at sort of like the trajectory of those and what happened, we often find a pattern. We find a pattern of how we show up in a relationship, right? Time and time again. Many, for my own self and many clients, there's this sort of alternating pattern of I'd be in a relationship with a good guy and I would sabotage and completely fuck it up. I'd be in a relationship with a bad guy and like turn myself out to make it happen. And it's so cliche and stereotypical. And that's why these, Bible theory and all this stuff exists, because there's also some truth to it. So realizing what was it I'm trying to get from this person and how do I give it to myself? Because when we start to do that work and heal ourselves and stop subconsciously even looking outside of ourselves and do that healing inner work and seeing what the pattern is. And for me, it's like I would see a person, be really attracted to them, put them on a pedestal, get in a relationship with them. Oh, wow, they're not actually that great. Start looking for the next relationship. Oh, wow, this person is amazing. And then that's how I moved for a very long time in my life.
Yes.
Until I got out of my relationship with the sex addict. And at that point, that was my third divorce. And from this very non-judgmental place was like, okay, I got to work on me now. There's something going on here. I'm not blaming myself for picking this person. I don't believe that our pickers are broken. I think all of that is so judgy. It's judgy. Oh. It's mean, right? I think it's mean.
Yeah, it is mean. You're mean. Right. It's mean to ourselves, you mean?
It's mean to ourselves. Yeah, it's mean to ourselves. And it's mean when people say that, but it's you're not broken. We're all doing the best that we can, right? It's all about it's what happened to us as little girls that we're still trying to work out. And when we understand what happened, when we understand or have some idea of why we're picking this person, right? Some of the women that I work with, it's they never felt safe as little girls. So they keep trying to pick a person where they feel safe, but they end up picking, and that says they're subconscious, but it's they're subconscious. They wind up they find themselves in a relationship with a person who can actually make them feel safe.
Yeah.
And so the work
recreates it, the feeling over and over.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. God, the mind and the body.
It's fascinating. And the body. Absolutely. Yes. Yes. Totally.
Yes. When I recently heard about that the subconscious is choosing our partners for us. Yeah. And that, I don't know why I'd not really heard that before, thinking, okay, no, you can be so conscious and thoughtful about it. And that can be true. But most of the time, it isn't just love at first sight, even though you may have felt that.
Exactly.
A lot of stuff going on underneath.
Exactly. One of my favorite examples was, I heard this from a psychologist years ago. She was talking about when we grow up, if we grow up with parents who smoke, right? Then our subconscious wires affection and home with the smell of cigarettes. And so then we meet a person who smokes and there's this, right? Immediately, this person feels like home. And we don't even know that that's happening in our brains, but because we have an association. So it's the same thing. If we live in a home where there's unsafety, that's home to us. And so then we meet a person and we don't actually feel safe, but it feels like home for us. And it's so the real work is actually learning to tolerate real safety, which could be a challenge for those of us who grew up feeling unsafe.
It's so true. And quite boring.
Yes.
A healthy relationship. It's kind of not exciting. And that's the thing.
Yes.
The more toxic and tumultuous, again, these words are thrown around a lot these days, which I think is kind of a good thing in a way. I mean, trauma now, maybe who I follow on Instagram, but it's so much content out there and so many people speaking to it, and trauma informed is now another thing I see quite a lot. So I think it's just, and regulating your nervous system. So again, luckily they're going together,
right?
And tools and things like that. So you have so many offerings and you have a podcast.
Yes.
And an amazing website. I have to say, it was just beautifully written with your voice.
Thank you.
It's, and it has that quiz on there, which I definitely recommend people take. Where can people find you, and what is the best place to go to sort of learn more and see you?
Yeah. Absolutely. I love for people to start with the quiz. Like it's based on trainings, but it's really based on like my experience in working with hundreds of women and learning what they really need in that moment. So it's betrayaltraumaquiz.com. You can go take it. It takes a few minutes and it will put you into it. It's like a sorting hat, right? It will put you into one of these places and start to get you all these resources, blog posts, podcasts, different things, different courses that I offer. And there's a whole lot of like evergreen stuff I'm like this close to launching so that people, it's always like that, right? I'm always like one sales page away from having everything done so that you can have more like videos, more self-paced kind of things to do. But you can always, I'm on Instagram, the Jenni Rochelle. There's lots of ways to get in touch with me. I do see private clients as well. I do from time to time offer Your Big Sexy Comeback as a live group program that I'll probably be offering at the beginning of next year, which is always just a profound, incredible experience to have women come in and reconnect with their bodies and realize how much their sexuality, which I believe is our God-given right, right? Like to have great sex and orgasms, and how much it's been impacted by the betrayal and by just being a woman in the world. And so that's one of the things I feel really at this point in my life, like the intimacy and the sexuality, the things that the juiciest for me, of course, is always where I am in my life, right? That's the work that we really want to do. So yeah, lots of ways to find me in the world, lots of ways to get in touch with me.
Okay. And I will link them as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
People. So the big sexy, you're in a prime, sounds like. Okay.
Yes.
I love
Absolutely.
it.
Yes.
That's
totally.
so great. I feel like I'm in my early 40s and I feel like I'm in my prime now. I never would have thought that. So I have to say, I tell younger women, like, just wait. It gets better.
It only gets better. No, there was a book that came out a couple of years ago called Magnificent Sex. And they interviewed and talked with people of different ages, of different bodies, of different abilities, right? All different kinds of people. And they interviewed like, what was the average age that they had magnificent sex? Guess what it was? 55. 55. 55.
No way.
55.
Was their partner also 55 or was he younger?
No, I think the partners was also 55. That's a great question. But it just speaks to the fact that like the older we get, this is also cliche, the less fucks that we give, the more comfortable we are with ourselves, the more like I'm going to be who I want to be in the world. Right.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. A couple more questions. I always ask, what are you most proud of up until this point?
Oh my goodness. What am I most proud of? I'm going to cry. I'm most proud of my boys. Like they're my greatest form of activism. And when I see them wrestling with things in the way and wrestling with things that are toxic masculinity, or like watching my oldest son care for his girlfriend in this really sweet way, or like, that's the thing I'm most proud of. And it's the hardest thing as well. Right?
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. And what are you most looking forward to right now?
What am I most looking forward to? Retirement.
Will you ever?
No, of course not. It was not possible. I'm trying to retire before and I'm like, I'm looking forward to the next thing. I'm actually at a moment in my life where I'm slowing things down in terms of my business and coaching and podcasts, and took actually sort of a hiatus over the summer because I do feel like there's something coming that I'm supposed to create. I don't know what it is yet. So I'm sitting in the stillness and the slowness until my intuition tells me what it's supposed to be. So, yeah.
That's great. But you can feel it. It's coming.
It's coming. Yeah.
This was such a great conversation.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm so honored to be here. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you. That brings us to the end of this episode. Thank you so much for being here. If you enjoy the show, please rate and review on Apple Podcasts. It makes a big difference for visibility. And even better, share this episode with a friend. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode every other Wednesday. If you're interested in working together to elevate your online presence, I'd love to hear from you. Reach out to me on Instagram at whereiswillow. I also hang out on LinkedIn, Willow McDonough. Until then, cheers to carving your own fucking path. I love you.